Hello and welcome to a special edition of the BA News Show. Special, I hear you ask? Well, this is actually the 50th edition. Yes, 50 times we have done this.
Mate, yeah, just to let you know, I've made a boo-boo there. Somehow I've managed to skip an episode out when I've been naming these things on YouTube, so yeah, it sort of is special, but sort of not as well.
Okay, well, welcome to the pretend 50th episode of the BA News Show with your hosts, me, I'm Rich, and my good friend, Ben Taverner.
Forever getting ahead of ourselves.
So I'd say a quiet week in the news, which I guess, given the fact it was next gen start next week with the release of the Xbox Series X on
the cusp of next gen
on the 10th, I think, off the top of my head, and obviously the 12th in America for the PS5. A little bit quiet this week, so lots to get through. Nothing major, but before we get into that, Tabs, what have you been playing this week?
So I would say mostly, well, we had quite the marathon session on Ghost of Tsushima, didn't we?
We certainly did.
Ghost of Tsushima raid on the Legends mode that's recently been released. We've put a lot of hours into this so far. Really enjoying it still. You know, the raid is complex. We tried Chapter 2. I'll let you tell us exactly what happened because it was a little bit of an anticlimax and turned a little bit into a miserable night in the end. But yeah, we basically, there's the three of us who play, and we've been having to go fishing for a fourth member, and we found a really, really good chap, didn't we? Who was very useful, and we're finding our rhythm now. We've got an assassin. I'm a Ronin. Rich is an assassin, and then we've got another chap who plays as a hunter. And I feel like we're really coming into our own, and it's nice to have that, to find that pace as we play. The problem is, of course, though, as Rich, you can tell us all about, I'm starting to feel like there's not a lot to aim for in terms of the money, the time we're investing in it, and the progression there. I feel like we've kind of hit a ceiling, really.
Yeah, so to give some background to that, the raids are completely blind. You go into it not knowing what's going to be. There's puzzle elements, platforming. You've got to get through, I guess, trials to move to next areas, and the trials might be puzzle related, they might be enemy related, etc. The first chapter took us nearly 3 hours, albeit we have subsequently replayed that, and it was a 48-minute run through. So most of that was working out what to do. And then we have tried Chapter 2 and got to what we think was the last area. So literally we just had to finish the area, and the game disconnected two of us and we couldn't get back on. There seemed to be some error with Ghost of Tsushima Legends, or it may have been with the PlayStation Network, which was a shame. But what Tabs is alluding to in terms of the time sponge, obviously, 3 hours to spend on something that's difficult and requires lots of teamwork and communication. At the end of it, you get basically a worthless item. You get a cosmetic item that gives you no buff on the game whatsoever. And I guess it's hard to justify spending the amount of time we're spending doing the raids, as enjoyable as they are, although they are quite stressful, to get very little for it. So yeah, a bit of a shame.
Because we're hitting peak builds, aren't we? In terms of, we're probably at the meta in terms of the builds we're currently rocking in our different classes. So for that reason, there's just not a lot of headroom there to progress into. And yeah, especially, after 2 hours on one of these raids, I start to mentally pass away. Yeah. And it can get a bit tense and a little bit, I think everybody's irritable at that point. So it can just be a little bit of a roller coaster ride of emotions, which perhaps that's part of the charm of raids. But Rich, tell us about another game you've been playing.
So obviously I've been playing that with Tabs, although after doing that on, I think that was Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember when it was. I've also been playing a lot of Pikmin 3 Deluxe, and I am absolutely loving it. It's a brilliant game. I think it's fantastic. If you're into that genre of game, which is the RTS genre, which fans of the channel will know I'm a big fan of RTS. I love this game. It's fantastic. It's fun to play.
You did say though, mate, stressful was the word you mentioned to me in the week. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so you're very time limited. So, you have a day to do the activities you need to do. And once the sun sets, you blast off from the planet, basically. So there's a stress of trying to get everything you want to get done, and also you may stumble across something new and think, all right, I need to do this, but you're like, oh, have I got enough time? So I've sort of eased into that a bit more now. I'm playing a slightly different style that makes it a little bit more different and stuff. But yeah, really love this game. If you haven't played it, honestly, and you enjoy this kind of game, go out and play it because it's such a lot of fun.
Right. Well, Rich, after that big long session of what we've been playing this week, should we hit the news?
Sounds good. So, first up, we have Gamepass, the Netflix of video games. And this comes from GameSpot. Microsoft Xbox Game Pass subscription service has drawn comparison to Netflix, with some calling it the Netflix of games. Xbox Jason Ronald said in a new interview that he is flattered by that comparison, as Netflix is one of the biggest and most successful entertainment brands on earth. But he also pointed out that it's not exactly a great comparison. To be compared to somebody like Netflix is flattering, but we think about it differently, Ronald told Inverse. It really comes down to how we can find new ways to get more people to enjoy the art form that we all love. Plenty of people prefer physical media, and we support that with Xbox Series X. Then you look at something like Game Pass, which gets people trying and playing more games. Maybe you're new to a franchise, or you have limited funds to devote to entertainment. With Game Pass, we eliminate the barrier. That's what we're focused on. How do we reduce barriers so more people can find and play the games they love? And that is a really interesting point, and something that Xbox are doing fantastically well with this Game Pass. They are making it so accessible. You only have to have your monthly subscription, which is very low compared to the cost of modern games now. So some titles that are coming out in physical media on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X can be up to £70. So the Game Pass, I think, offers accessibility, great value, and is just a brilliant thing that Xbox have done. And I applaud them for that. What's your thoughts on this, Tabs?
Yeah, very much the same, mate. I said before we started filming, didn't I, that I kind of picked this piece because I know we've been perhaps a little bit negative on Microsoft in terms of, their software pipeline, Halo Infinite, in previous news episodes and just generally on the channel. But this, this statement, it does, it warms the old heart a little bit, especially when he actually calls, video games, the medium, if you like, an art form, which is something that I've, firmly believe in. And it is only a good thing. Lowering the barriers to entry for people, getting more people passionate about video games, only serves to, to bolster, this kind of hobby that we love. That that's taken up so much of our time. We devote so much of our lives to. So, the more people, the merrier. The more money that goes into it. And again, as gamers, we're going to see more investment and better games on the output of that. So, fair play to Jason.
The thing I really like about this is everything he's saying is skewed towards gamers. He's saying we want to empower them to play as many games as they want for sort of as little amount of money as that they can justify, really. And I think that's something that we don't see enough within the games industry, empowering gamers, for have as much accessibility as they can. We see a lot of, we see monetization, we see, all those different things that are sort of barriers of entry for lots of people. And it's great to see something that's very gamer orientated. And I really love that.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm sure he's very conscious of the fact that he's trying to market the brand and, sell that as much as he is, sharing genuine, thoughtful opinions, feelings. But, again, that art form bit there really did make me think that he must feel passionate about that to actually call it an art form. And yeah, I just think it's a nice sentiment at the very least. So good on you, Xbox, and good on you, Jason Ronald. But Rich, shall I move us on?
Go for it.
So the topic number 2 this week is Starfield sounds ambitious. So this comes courtesy of Polygon. Starfield, Bethesda Xbox's next big role-playing game will be powered by an overhauled creation engine whose capabilities will be a larger leap forward than the one seen from 2002's The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind on the Xbox. And that's compared to 2006, The Elder Scrolls III Oblivion on the Xbox 360. So I think from memory, that was a pretty decent step up. So according to Bethesda Game Studios creative director Todd Howard, in a keynote appearance for the Develop Brighton Online conference, Howard added that the sci-fi RPG will rely more on procedural generation than past Bethesda titles did. So specifically, he had to say, from rendering to animation to pathing to procedural generation, I don't want to say everything, but it's a significant overhaul. Howard told host James Batchelor of Games Industry Biz, "It's taken us longer than we would have liked, but it's going to power everything we're doing with Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6. When people see the results, they'll hopefully be as happy as we are with what's on the screen, and also how we can go about making our games." So yeah, I mean, we've got a little bit more to finish on this topic, but I just thought that is quite the statement, isn't it? We know Todd Howard has had a bit of a checkered past with the way he makes these big exclamatory statements about their produce, and certainly with the likes of Fallout 76, perhaps that didn't go down quite as well as they'd hoped. But the way he's speaking of it, and he spoke about it in such high acclaim in the past, this sounds like it's going to pack some punch. And even there, when he's talking about the graphical fidelity somewhat, when we see the results, he says he must be pretty confident that this is a spectacular looking game. And from all accounts, Rich, we understand it's probably going to be like an open world space game akin to perhaps No Man's Sky.
Absolutely.
Which rings true with this mention of procedural generation, which No Man's Sky uses heavily. But Rich, do you want to tell us a little bit about this apparent leak recently and what we might have seen and now know about the game in a bit more detail?
Absolutely. So the recent leak, and a lot of this information comes from IGN. All of the leaks so far show astronauts standing outside of a space station of varying materials and architecture. The player character appears to have a health and stamina bar and a firearm, and there are some kind of survival mechanics nodes in the bottom left of the UI, with a CO2 and O2 meter, as well as potential gravity indicators. It may be that you can build these settlements while managing your various needs in space to survive in Starfield. So really interesting. I said to Tabs before we went on air here before we started filming, that I thought this game was incredibly ambitious, and if they can deliver on 3/4 of what they've said about this, it's going to be amazing. There are some caveats to that, and Tabs has already mentioned one, that the chap, this Todd Howard, who's sort of bigging this up, has failed before, and Tabs mentioned Fallout 76. They bigged that up like it was going to be incredible, and it was a bit of a letdown, wasn't it, Tabs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually been more or less fixed now from some of what I'm hearing, but that's taken a very long time to get it up to scratch. And when it first came out, I think it was a steaming pile of trash.
It's really interesting you should mention that, because I think it's been noted a few times that there's a potential this game could come out in installments. Have you heard this, Tabs?
What, Starfield?
Yeah. And I've not heard that. It's going to be like they're going to release the game, but it's going to be coming as more and more. So it's going to come out, but then they'll add stuff to it as it goes along to become what they've promised everyone that it will be.
Almost like a live service. That reminds me, there's another space sim, isn't there, that the name eludes me, that that's been widely called a bit of a con, because I think it's been in development for like 10 years plus. Oh, and it's still...
Maybe I'm getting confused with that one then, mate.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, you might be, because they are very similar concepts, like these kind of open world space sims. So it might well be that. But I don't know about you, Rich, but that write-up by IGN there, it kind of made it sound a bit like Death Stranding in space to me. So it's got the survival mechanics node, which gives you measures on the UI of CO2 and an O2 meter and a gravity indicator. And then there's the mention of settlements and managing them. So yeah, I'm excited by it. If it's going to be kind of an Elder Scrolls / Fallout, but like kind of in a space environment and climate, then it sounds really cool.
Definitely.
I mean, the procedural generation, I've never been a huge fan on in games generally, because they kind of lose that kind of authored, crafted design
Absolutely.
that I really love in games. But maybe this is implemented in a next gen way, which is has kind of avoided a lot of those pitfalls that we've seen in previous games.
Yeah, I guess the trouble with that is it's hard to have a decent narrative when it's like that. When it's it's all being created on the fly. It's hard to have a decent narrative within that, isn't it?
Yeah, this is it, and I'm sure they've got ways and means. If you put enough effort in, I'm sure there's ways and means to get around that. But yeah, it's a drawback, and they can't be talking this big about it and then it's going to fall flat on its face, surely. And now with the power of Xbox backing them and behind them, this has got to be a huge success, and I'm sure it will be. But Rich, do you want to take us on to topic number 3 today?
Absolutely, and one that's divided the channel a little bit. So PS5 doesn't support 1440p. This piece of information comes from IGN. The PS5 apparently won't support a native 1440p resolution, according to IGN Italy, which says it received official confirmation from Sony Europe on Wednesday. This is bad news for the PlayStation fans with 1440p gaming monitors, as it means the PS5 will not play ball with the intended resolutions for the set, likely upscaling from 1080p to compensate. We've contacted Sony for comment. Not us, IGN Italy. The PlayStation, as we already know, the PlayStation 5 can output a maximum resolution of 8K and 4K 120 frames per second via HDMI 2.1 compliant TVs. It'll be fine at 1080p resolution too, but the in-between resolution used by many PC gaming seemingly won't be supported by the new console at launch. Now, my thoughts are on this. I'm not really too bothered because I'm going to be playing my games in 4K, so I don't think this is too much of a worry. Obviously, it is for people who are using 1440p monitors, but I don't think, I think this is a software implementation, and I think they can fix this with an update, so I'm not too worried about this. We already know the hardware is there and it can work it, so I'm not too worried about this. Tabs, what's your take?
Yeah, I think I feel 1440p is a real sweet spot of a resolution, which allows you to also attain the heights of up to 120 hertz or frames per second, which is, you want that fluidity on games. It makes, for me anyway, a much nicer experience. So it just feels like they've got these kind of poles apart where you could have 4K 30 frames per second or, 1080p 60 frames per second or maybe up to 120, but they haven't got that sweet spot in between. And I think as we wander into the next gen environment, that's going to become pretty crucial. We're seeing with Spider-Man Miles Morales, and I know it's not been optimized for the PS5, but I think the choices was, Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, 4K 30 frames per second with ray tracing, or you've got is it 1080p 60 frames per second?
So.
Something along those lines anyway. Excuse me if I've got that a bit cockeyed. But yeah, what I'm saying is when we push into next generation and we're seeing games really utilize the hardware, I think they're going to find it very difficult to have a 4K 60 to 120 frames per second games when they're really being weighed down with all those juicy next gen assets, and that kind of fidelity we're likely going to see. Whereas if we enable this 1440p sweet spot, I think that gives us a lot more headroom for performance. But you did say, Rich, it is very possible that we might just see this unlocked in a software update, a firmware update at some point, and before we go in too hard and naysay and worry, that's an easy fix, isn't it, potentially?
I mean, it's a really interesting point you make. They say, PlayStation 5, it can do 8K. I mean, are we going to see any games running 8K? I think it's extremely unlikely. I mean, we might see 8K Blu-rays maybe, but I think it's extremely unlikely we're going to see any 8K games.
I'll just correct myself, mate. Spider-Man, is it 4K 60 frames per second without ray tracing, but you can do 4K 30 frames per second and you get ray tracing?
Potentially, yeah, I think that might be it. Yeah, but I think you're right. I think early implementation we're going to see a lot of 4K 30, but ultimately I think we're going to we're going to end up as a 4K 60. I think that's going to be where we end up. That will be the norm for games, I think, moving, if we look, say, a year, 18 months into it, I think that's going to be where we're mostly at. I don't think we'll see any games this generation at all running 8K. I just think that's not going to happen.
Okay then, mate. Well, there's a question for you. If you've got a choice between 4K 60 frames per second or 1440p 120 frames per second, what would you choose?
To be honest, I don't know. I'd like to see a comparison side by side of whether you can really tell the difference.
What, between the 4K and the 1440p,
no,
or the 60 frames per second and
60
120?
and 120.
Well, this is it. This is true, because it's a subjective thing, isn't it? People are more sensitive to frame rates, others are more sensitive to resolutions, I'm sure. So, and it does depend on the type of game, doesn't it? Because if it's one of these quick kind of reflex games, or let's say a Bloodborne, Souls type game where you need that, you need that immediate response on the screen, where you want a better frame rate. But if it's more of a laid back story adventure game, perhaps something like a God of War maybe, or Horizon Forbidden West, then maybe you don't command that quite so hard. But yeah, Arcadians, let us know your thoughts. I'd love to hear your perspective on this one. And as I say, could be a non-issue really. But it was a bit of a dry news week, wasn't it, Rich?
It was, yeah. And on that note, let's do everything else. So I'm going to kick this one off. So Commandos 2 HD Remaster for the Switch has finally been dated. It is the 4th of December, and it dropped a new trailer. And I think this is looking pretty good. Looks like it expands. I believe this has already dropped on, the HD Remaster has already dropped on other consoles, I believe. But yeah, the Switch version, I think this looks good. It looks good as a handheld thing. I personally found Commandos a very difficult game. So yeah, interested to see what reviews that gets.
Spot on. We've got Black Ops revealed to be 130 gigabytes on next gen. Presumably this is Call of Duty.
Yes, absolutely. I was just staggered by
big
that.
Wedge.
That's maybe like a fifth of the available capacity of a digital edition of the PlayStation 5.
See, I'm sure that can be compressed down. I think it's sometimes just a choice by developers that they decide not to. But yeah, that is a pretty bulky file size.
New Fall Guy level and an update are on the way. The news comes courtesy of an official tweet teasing about it by the Fallout guys.
Exciting times. Godfall, we've had the PC hardware requirements have come out, and from what we can see, they're pretty steep. So CPU i7 8700 plus, and then you've got 16 gigabytes of RAM, and then a 1080 Ti. So that's again a GTX 1080 Ti, is it, Rich? 11 gigabytes of RAM. Yeah. Did I say that all right?
Yeah. I was staggered by that. It's probably one of the although this is a next gen game, isn't it? This is coming out on PS5 and Xbox Series X, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it makes sense that it would be highly hardware specific for the PC. So I think from what I've read, most people with PCs nowadays will be able to run that are like gaming PC type of people, but maybe not always at the highest specifications. And
a GPU with a minimum spec, a TI, a TI model GPU, that is fairly chunky, isn't it? So.
Especially we've got 2080 GTXs in our
RTXs, yeah.
But ours are only 8 gigs. So that's a chunk of a card, that is. But anyway, moving on. And finally this week, The Witcher 3 on Xbox Series X has instant fast travel thanks to improved grunt of the hardware and including the SSD. I think that's impressive. We finally have fast travel. It's a thing.
Yeah, and similarly on PS5, you can fast travel anywhere on your game if the developer allows you to, which is going to be interesting.
Crazy. So that brings this week's news to an end. I hope you've enjoyed the news and it's been informative for you. If you have, drop us a like down below. It really does help grow and support the channel. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe and click that bell to stay abreast of all notifications for our new content. And I think that's all we've got time for this week. Another one for the archive.
Stamped and complete.